Alessandro Rossi walked into Boston's most exclusive jewelry boutique that Tuesday afternoon to buy his fiancée Serena the perfect engagement ring. But the moment his eyes locked with the pregnant woman behind the counter, Lucia, the ex-wife he'd spent 2 years trying to forget, he forgot why he'd come at all. The showroom smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. Afternoon sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching on display cases that held more wealth than most people earned in a lifetime. Everything whispered discretion, from the cream-coloured carpet that absorbed footsteps to the soft classical music barely audible above the hum of climate control. Alessandro had chosen this location precisely because men like him could conduct business here without attracting attention. No photographers, no questions, just transactions wrapped in velvet and platinum. His driver waited outside in the idling Mercedes. The appointment had been scheduled for precisely 2:30, giving him 45 minutes before his meeting with the Philadelphia delegation. Serena had sent him photographs of 3 acceptable styles, each costing more than a luxury sedan. The marriage made sense for both families. She understood the life, asked nothing about love, and her father controlled the Eastern Seaboard distribution networks Alessandro needed to expand legitimate operations. A clean arrangement, bloodless and beneficial. The woman behind the counter had her back turned, adjusting something in a display case near the rear wall. Dark hair pulled into a simple twist, black dress beneath a grey cardigan that had seen better days. Nothing like the elegant saleswoman he'd expected. "I'll be right with you," she called without turning, her voice professional but distracted. Alessandro's hand rested on the glass case before him, rings glittering beneath his palm like captured stars. He was formulating his request when she turned around. Time didn't stop, it fractured. Lucia Bellini stood 3 feet away, her face draining of colour as recognition hit them both simultaneously. The measuring tool she'd been holding clattered against the counter. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that drew his eyes downwards to the undeniable swell beneath her loose-fitting dress. She was pregnant. Very pregnant. Alessandro. His name barely escaped her lips, more breath than sound. He couldn't respond. His voice had abandoned him completely, leaving only the thundering of his pulse in his ears. 2 years of carefully constructed distance, of forcing himself not to search for her, of accepting she was gone, all of it dissolved in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Her hair was shorter now, just brushing her shoulders instead of the long waves she'd worn when they were married. The cardigan she wore had a button missing. Her shoes were practical, worn at the heels. Everything about her appearance spoke of a life lived on tighter margins than the one she'd left behind. But her eyes remained the same green that had first caught his attention 5 years ago, though now they held something harder, something that looked like fear mixed with steel. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. "I had an appointment," he managed, the words feeling absurd even as he spoke them. "For a ring." Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or resignation. Of course he did. The nameplate on the counter read L. Morrison, not Bellini, not Rossi. A new name for a new life. "You changed your name," he said. "I changed everything." Her hand remained on her belly, fingers splayed protectively. Alessandro's mind raced through calculations he'd spent 2 years trying not to make. They'd been married for 18 months before she disappeared. Their last night together had been volcanic, desperate. Both of them knowing something was breaking between them, but unable to stop reaching for each other one final time. That had been 27 months ago, maybe 28. The pregnancy looked advanced. 6 months at least, possibly 7. His chest tightened as mathematics provided answers he couldn't afford to speak aloud. Not here. Not with another customer browsing wedding bands 3 displays away. Not when everything about this moment felt like standing on ice too thin to support his weight. How long? The question came out rougher than he intended. Lucia's expression shuttered completely. "How long what? How long have you been in Boston?" "Long enough." She straightened, reaching for the professional mask she'd been wearing before she turned around. "What style of ring are you looking for?" The deflection landed like a physical blow. She was good at this, at pretending they were strangers conducting business. 2 years must have given her plenty of practice at erasing what they'd been to each other. "Lucia, it's Lucy here," she interrupted. "Lucy Morrison. And I'm happy to help you find something appropriate for your fiancé, Mr. Sari. Rossi, but I prefer if we kept this professional." Professional. As if his world hadn't just tilted sideways. As if the woman he'd loved more than his own survival wasn't standing before him carrying what might be his child while he shopped for another woman's ring. The store manager appeared from a back office. sensing something wrong in the atmosphere. "Is everything all right here, Lucy?" "Fine," Lucy answered quickly. Too quickly. Mr. Rossi was just telling me what he's looking for. Alessandro forced his business face into place, the one he wore during negotiations that required showing nothing. Platinum, simple setting, 2 carats, maybe 3. Excellent choice. Lucia's voice remained steady, but he could see the pulse hammering at her throat. "We have several options that might work. Let me show you." She unlocked the case with hands that shook just slightly, pulling out a velvet tray. 3 rings caught the afternoon light, throwing rainbows across the counter between them. Each one perfect, each one wrong. "These are popular for engagements," she explained, falling into what must be a practice sales pitch. "The clarity is exceptional and the settings are designed to maximize. Is it mine?" The question escaped before he could stop it, too low for the manager to hear but landing between them like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Lucia's eyes snapped to his face. For 1 heartbeat. 2. They stared at each other across the display case. Everything they'd been, everything they'd lost, everything unspoken for 2 years, compressed into the space between them. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally. But they both knew she was lying. That afternoon would shatter 2 years of carefully maintained distance, reveal secrets neither of them were prepared to face, and force Alessandro to choose between the future he'd planned and the past he'd never stopped wanting. He just didn't know it yet. If your heart just stopped reading that, you're not alone. This story gets deeper than you think. Hit that like button if you're already invested, because what happens when Alessandro demands answers will change everything. Also, don't forget to comment the country you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. 5 years earlier, Alessandro had been a different kind of dangerous. Younger, harder, freshly appointed to run the family's Chicago operations after his uncle's sudden retirement. He'd spent the morning handling a dispute between 2 crews that had nearly turned violent, the afternoon reviewing shipment manifests that told lies in every column, and now he stood on the steps of his grandmother's building in Little Italy, trying to remember how to be a grandson instead of a boss. Nonna Rosa lived on the 3rd floor of a walk-up that had housed 4 generations of Rosses. The building smelled like garlic and old wood, and memories that refused to fade. Every Sunday without fail, Alessandro climbed these stairs, sat at her tiny kitchen table, and pretended for 2 hours that his hands were clean. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the community center next door. He glanced through the window as he passed, drawn by the noise. A woman stood surrounded by 8 or 9 kids, all of them wielding paintbrushes with varying degrees of success. She wore jeans with paint stains on the knees, and a white shirt that had seen better days. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders as she crouched beside a small boy guiding his hand across paper. "No, like this, Marco," she said, demonstrating a brushstroke. "See how the color changes when you add more water?" Alessandro found himself pausing, watching through the glass. The woman moved with easy confidence, completely absorbed in teaching children who came from families that could barely afford art supplies. She laughed when one girl accidentally splattered green paint across her own face. She celebrated when a shy boy finally showed her his finished work. There was something about her that made him forget, just for a moment, the weight he carried. "Alessandro!" His grandmother's voice called from above. "Are you coming up or standing in the hallway all day?" He climbed the stairs, but the image of the woman stayed with him through dinner. Nonna Rosa served her usual spread. Pasta made that morning, sauce simmering since dawn, bread from the bakery 3 blocks over. She talked while he ate, updating him on neighborhood gossip with the detailed knowledge of someone who'd lived on the same street for 60 years. "That's Lucia Bellini down at the community center," she said, catching him glancing toward the window again. "She teaches art to the neighborhood children every Sunday. Lovely girl, comes from nothing but gives everything." "You know her?" Alessandro asked, keeping his tone casual. "Everyone knows her. She volunteers 4 afternoons a week, never charges the families a cent." Nonna Rosa paused, studying him with eyes that saw too much. "She's good people, Alessandro. Pure heart. Pure, the word felt foreign in his world. After dinner, he found an excuse to walk past the community center. The class had ended, but Lucia was still inside, cleaning paintbrushes at a small sink. He pushed open the door before he could reconsider. She looked up, water still running over her hands. "We're closed. Classes don't start again until Tuesday. I'm not here for class." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. "My grandmother lives upstairs, Rosa Rossi." Recognition flickered across Lucia's face, followed by something more complicated. She knew the name. Everyone in Little Italy knew the Rossi name and what it meant. "You're Alessandro," she said, turning off the water but not moving closer. "She talks about you. Nothing too bad, I hope." She thinks the sun rises and sets on your command. Lucia dried her hands on a towel, studying him with directness that should have felt intrusive, but somehow didn't. You don't look like someone who controls the sun. The observation caught him off guard. Most people either feared him or wanted something from him. She seemed to be doing neither. What do I look like? He asked. She tilted her head, considering. Tired, like you're carrying something heavier than you should be. The accuracy of it made him uncomfortable. You got all that from 30 seconds? I teach children. You learn to read people. She returned to organizing paintbrushes, arranging them by size with methodical precision. Your grandmother brings me cannoli every Tuesday. Says I work too hard and need to eat more. Do you? Work too hard or need to eat more? Both. Lucia smiled, a real one that transformed her entire face. Probably. But the kids need someone, and I'm here. Alessandro moved deeper into the room, drawn despite himself. Children's artwork covered every wall, explosions of colour and imagination that bore no resemblance to the grey world he inhabited. Why here? Why these kids? Because nobody else does it. She said it simply, as if the answer were obvious. These families can't afford private lessons or fancy supplies. Their kids deserve beauty anyway. Beauty doesn't pay bills. Neither does whatever you do, she countered, meeting his eyes directly. But I'm guessing you do it anyway, because it matters to you. He should have left then. Should have recognized the danger of someone who saw through surfaces to the person underneath. Instead, he found himself asking, do you need help with supplies or funding? Suspicion crossed her face. Why would you offer that? My grandmother likes you. That's enough. Is it? Lucia moved closer, close enough that he could smell paint and soap on her skin. Or are you the kind of man who buys things to own them? The challenge in her voice should have irritated him. Instead, it made him want to prove her wrong. I'm the kind of man who keeps his grandmother happy, then donate to the centre anonymously. I don't take money from people whose names come with strings attached. She thought she knew what he was. She was right about the power, wrong about everything else. Or maybe she was more right than she wanted to be, and that scared both of them. No strings, he promised, knowing even as he said it that he was lying. The moment she'd looked at him without fear, the string had already formed. What Lucia didn't know yet would eventually break them both. But standing in that paint-spattered classroom, with afternoon light turning her hair bronze and her eyes demanding honesty he'd forgotten how to give, Alessandro felt something shift inside his chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. 6 months passed like stolen time, each moment borrowed from a future neither of them could quite see clearly. Alessandro started showing up at the community centre every Sunday after visiting his grandmother. At first he claimed he was just passing through. Then he stopped pretending. He'd sit in the back of the classroom while Lucia taught, watching her transform nervous children into small artists who believed their hands could create magic. She never asked him to leave, and he never offered to explain why he kept coming back. Their first real date happened on a Tuesday afternoon in April. He picked her up after her morning classes, drove her to the art institute without telling her where they were going. She'd laughed when she realized, accusing him of being too obvious. Taking an art teacher to an art museum? You could have tried harder. I did try harder, he'd replied. I called ahead. We have the Impressionist gallery to ourselves for an hour. Her expression had shifted then, wonder replacing teasing. You can do that? I can do a lot of things. She'd studied his face, reading what he wasn't saying. Should I be worried about how? Probably. The honesty had surprised him, but not today. They spent that hour among Monet's water lilies and Renoir's dancers, and Lucia talked about light and colour with a passion that made even masterpieces seem secondary to the joy of watching her experience them. Alessandro found himself memorising the way she moved, the sound of her voice when she forgot to guard her enthusiasm, the small crease that appeared between her eyebrows when she concentrated on a particular brushstroke. He was falling, and he knew it, and he couldn't seem to stop. Their relationship developed in the spaces between his other life. Afternoon walks along the lakefront when he should have been at meetings, dinners at small restaurants where nobody knew his name or cared about his family, lazy Sunday mornings at her apartment, drinking coffee while she sketched and he pretended to read the paper but really just watched her hands move across the page. Lucia asked questions, of course. She was too smart not to notice the contradictions. The expensive car and custom suits paired with vague explanations about import-export business. The phone calls he took in other rooms, voice dropping to tones she couldn't quite hear. The way men on the street sometimes nodded to him with respect that looked more like fear. What exactly does your family import? She asked one evening over dinner. Alessandro had prepared for this. Various goods, mostly from Italy and Eastern Europe. That's deliberately vague. It's deliberately boring. You'd fall asleep if I explained distribution logistics. She'd let it go, but her eyes told him she wasn't fooled. She was choosing to trust him, and that trust felt heavier than any debt he carried. He tried to keep her separate from family business. No dinners with his cousins who handled enforcement. No meetings at the social club where deals got made over espresso and handshakes that meant more than contracts. No glimpses into the machinery that kept the Rossi family powerful and prosperous and perpetually one step ahead of federal investigators. But separation only worked up to a point. His mother met Lucia at a charity benefit Alessandro couldn't avoid attending. The meeting had been brief, polite, and afterwards his mother had called him with ice in her voice. "She's beautiful, Alessandro. She's also completely unsuitable, you know this." "I know she makes me happy." Happy. His mother had laughed, sharp and bitter. "Your father was happy once. It doesn't last, it doesn't matter. She'll never understand our world, and you'll resent her for it." But his grandmother adored Lucia, and Nonna Rosa's opinion carried weight even his mother couldn't dismiss entirely. Slowly, carefully, his family began to accept her presence. They were cautious about conversations when she was around. They smiled and asked about her students and pretended the undercurrent of violence and power meant nothing. Lucia softened edges in Alessandro he'd thought were permanently sharp. He found himself considering consequences beyond profit and control. He started asking whether things were right instead of just whether they were effective. He caught himself thinking about futures that involved children and normal Sunday dinners, and a life that didn't require looking over his shoulder. The marriage proposal happened in September, 8 months after they'd met. He took her to the lakefront at sunset. No grand gestures or public displays, just the two of them and a ring he'd chosen himself, a simple sapphire that matched her eyes. "I know I'm not what you should want," he'd said. The box opened between them. "I know my life is complicated and my family is difficult and there are things about me you don't fully understand yet. But I love you, Lucia. I love you in a way that makes everything else seem like noise." She'd looked at the ring, then at him, and he'd seen the war happening behind her eyes. The practical side that recognized the danger, the heart that wanted to believe love could be enough. "Tell me the truth about one thing," she'd said. "Are you a good man doing bad things or a bad man pretending to be good?" He'd wanted to lie. The lie would have been easier. Instead, he said, "I'm trying to be the man you see when you look at me." That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She'd been quiet for a long moment, watching boats move across the water. Then she'd held out her hand. "Yes, but Alessandro, if I find out you've lied to me about who you really are, I won't stay. Love isn't enough if it's built on deception." He'd slipped the ring on her finger, sealing a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. She believed love could survive anything, could transform darkness into light through sheer force of faith. He wanted to believe it too. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony that pleased no one but themselves. His family thought she was naive. Her friends thought he was dangerous. Both were right. For 18 months they existed in a strange balance, happy in the moments they carved out together, strained when his world intruded in ways she couldn't ignore, building something fragile and precious and ultimately unsustainable. If you've ever loved someone you knew you shouldn't, you understand what comes next. Tap that subscribe button because their story is about to take a turn that changes everything. The first year of marriage taught Lucia that love and truth were not always compatible. She kept teaching at the community centre 3 afternoons a week, expanded her schedule to include weekend workshops for teenagers. The work fulfilled something in her that Alessandro's world never could. Her students came from families who knew struggle intimately, who understood that beauty mattered precisely because life was hard. When she was with them, surrounded by paint and possibility, she could almost forget the growing unease that followed her home each evening. Alessandro's schedule became increasingly unpredictable. Breakfast meetings that started before dawn, lunch appointments that stretched into afternoon, dinners with business associates whose names she never quite caught. He'd come home late, smelling like cigars and expensive cologne that wasn't his own, and she'd pretend not to notice the tension in his shoulders or the way his eyes scanned their apartment as if checking for threats. "How was your day?" she'd ask, the question becoming ritual. "Busy." "Yours?" Marco finally finished his landscape. He wants to give it to his mother for her birthday. Alessandro would smile, genuine warmth breaking through his exhaustion. "That's good. You're good with them." Then his phone would ring, and he'd step into the bedroom, voice dropping to tones she couldn't decipher. She'd stand in their kitchen, listening to the cadence of conversations conducted in careful code, and wonder what she'd married into. The family dinners were worse. Once a month they gathered at his parents' house in the suburbs. The home was beautiful in the way mausoleums are beautiful. Impressive, cold. designed to intimidate. Alessandro's mother Francesca presided over these meals with the authority of a woman who'd spent 40 years managing appearances. His father, Marco Sr., said little but missed nothing. Lucia would sit at their dining table, surrounded by cousins and uncles and family friends whose relationships she couldn't quite map, listening to conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. "How's the teaching going, dear?" Francesca would ask, the endearment carrying subtle condescension. "Very well, we have 30 students now, up from 20 when I started." "How lovely. Alessandro, did you speak with your uncle about the warehouse situation?" And just like that, Lucia would become invisible. They'd discuss shipments and territory and logistics in language that sounded legitimate but felt wrong, words that seemed to mean more than they said, references to people by nicknames that carried weight she couldn't measure. She'd catch Alessandro's grandmother watching her sometimes. Nonna Rosa's expression sad in a way that suggested she knew exactly how this story would end. "You should ask him," the old woman said one Sunday after everyone else had left. "Whatever you're afraid to know, you should ask." "I'm not afraid," Lucia lied. Nonna Rosa had touched her hand, papery skin warm against hers. "Yes, you are, and you should be." The conversations with Alessandro happened in fragments, never quite reaching resolution. "I need to know what you actually do," Lucia said one night, after he'd cancelled their anniversary dinner for the third time. "I run import businesses." "I told you this." "That's what you say." "It's not what I see." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "What do you see?" "Men who treat you like you're royalty. Phone calls in the middle of the night, cash in amounts that don't make sense. You disappearing for hours without explanation." She paused. "I see you coming home with bruised knuckles you claim came from the gym." "I work out hard. Stop lying to me." The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Alessandro crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "Everything I do is to build us a future. The legitimate businesses are growing. In 5 years, maybe 10, I can step away from the parts you don't like. But right now, I have to manage what my father built." What exactly did he build? Power, security. A life where our children won't want for anything. Children. The word redirected her attention as he'd probably known it would. They'd been trying for months without success. Each negative test felt like another door closing, another sign that perhaps the universe was trying to tell her something she didn't want to hear. "I want a family with you," Alessandro continued, pulling her closer. "I want Sunday mornings and school plays and teaching our kids to paint like you do. But I need you to trust me to handle the business side. Can you do that?" She wanted to say no, wanted to demand complete transparency or walk away. Instead, she heard herself say, "How long? How long before you can step away?" 5 years, maybe less if the expansion goes well. "And you promise the future is legitimate?" "I promise I'm working toward that every day." "How?" It was a careful answer, lawyer precise, leaving room for interpretation. But Lucia was tired of fighting, tired of feeling like she was competing with a world she couldn't see. She chose to believe him because the alternative was admitting her marriage was built on foundations too rotten to support anything real. Her doctor confirmed the pregnancy on a Tuesday in March. 14 months into their marriage, Lucia sat in the examination room, staring at the ultrasound image, feeling joy and terror in equal measure. A child would bind her to Alessandro forever, would make leaving impossible even if she discovered truths she couldn't live with. She told him that evening over dinner, watching his face transform with unguarded happiness. For one perfect moment, he was just a man learning he would be a father. No shadows, no secrets, just pure, uncomplicated joy. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We're having a baby," she confirmed. He held her close, making promises about the father he'd be, the life they'd build. And Lucia chose to believe every word, even as some part of her whispered warnings she refused to hear. 2 weeks later, she'd find the files hidden in his office, evidence she couldn't ignore, couldn't explain away, couldn't unsee. But tonight, she let herself be happy. Let herself believe that love and trust could coexist with secrets, that the man holding her was exactly who he seemed to be in these stolen moments of tenderness. She believed it right up until the moment everything shattered. The locked drawer in Alessandro's home office opened easily once Lucia found the key taped beneath his desk. She hadn't meant to search. She'd been looking for their insurance documents, 8 weeks pregnant and trying to add the baby to their coverage before her next appointment. Alessandro kept all their important papers in his office, had told her 100 times to help herself to whatever she needed, but he'd never mentioned the locked drawer, and something about finding that hidden key made her hand shake as she turned it in the lock. Inside lay manila folders organized with the same precision Alessandro applied to everything. She pulled out the first one expecting tax documents or property deeds. Instead, she found photographs. A warehouse burned to its foundation. Fire damage so severe she could smell the smoke through the glossy paper. Well, the date stamp showed 2 months ago. Clipped to the photo was a newspaper article about a suspicious fire that destroyed a family-owned importing business. 3 people hospitalized. The owner quoted saying he'd received threats about selling his property but had refused because his grandfather built the company from nothing. Lucia's stomach turned. She reached for the next folder. Financial records showing payments to names she didn't recognize. Amounts that made her teaching salary look like pocket change. Notations in Alessandro's handwriting. Coded references that meant nothing until she saw the pattern. Money going out. Businesses closing. Properties changing hands at prices below market value. Her husband's neat columns documenting systematic destruction. The third folder contained legal documents, lawsuits threatened but never filed, complaints to police that went nowhere, witness statements that changed between first and final versions, and photographs of men whose faces she recognized from family dinners, standing outside courthouses and police stations with expressions that promised consequences. She read until her vision blurred. Until the baby kicked hard enough to remind her she was carrying a child into a world built on other people's suffering. Until she understood with terrible clarity that Alessandro hadn't been protecting her from his work. He'd been protecting his work from her judgment. The front door opened downstairs. His footsteps on the stairs lighter than usual. He was home early, probably excited to spend the evening discussing baby names and nursery colours. Lucia stood, folders clutched in trembling hands, and waited. Alessandro appeared in the doorway, smile dying the moment he saw what she held. His eyes went to the open drawer, then to her face, and she watched him make calculations about damage control. "Lucia? Don't." A voice came out steadier than she felt. "Don't tell me this means something other than what it obviously means." He stepped into the room, hands raised slightly, the gesture of someone approaching a frightened animal. "You weren't supposed to find those." "I gathered that. You want to explain why you have photographs of buildings you burned down?" "I didn't burn anything down. Your family did, at your direction." She threw the folders onto his desk, papers scattering. "I found payment records, Alessandro. I found notes in your handwriting. I found evidence of exactly what your family does to people who refuse to cooperate. You're taking things out of context." "Then give me context." She moved closer, forcing him to look at her. "Tell me how threatening families and destroying livelihoods is taken out of context. Explain how witness statements changing mysteriously is somehow acceptable. Make me understand how the man I married is involved in this." Alessandro's face hardened into an expression she'd never seen before. The mask he wore in his other life, the one he'd kept carefully hidden from her. "You want the truth? Fine. Yes, my family has business interests that operate in grey areas. Yes, sometimes we have to apply pressure to protect those interests. That's how the world works, Lucia. That's how I can afford the life you enjoy. I never asked for any of this. You accepted it happily enough. The apartment, the car, the security of never worrying about money. You think that comes from importing olive oil?" The cruelty in his voice shocked her more than the admission. "I thought it came from legitimate businesses. You promised me." "I promised I was working toward legitimate. I never promised I was there yet." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration replacing anger. "Look, most of what we do is legal. Some of it exists in areas the law hasn't caught up to yet. And yes, occasionally we have to convince people to see things our way, but nobody gets hurt if they cooperate. 3 people were hospitalized in that warehouse fire. They got out. We made sure of that." "You made sure?" Lucia pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby move. "You talk about it like you're negotiating contracts, not ruining lives. I'm protecting our family. My father built this organization to give us power in a world that crushes people like us. I'm maintaining what he created until I can transition us into something cleaner. That takes time." "How much time?" "I don't know. 5 years. 10. Our child will be in school by then." She felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. "You want me to raise a baby in this world? To teach them right from wrong while their father does this?" Alessandro reached for her, but she stepped back. The distance between them felt infinite. "I love you," he said quietly. "Everything I do is to build us a future. You're building a prison." The truth settled over her with crushing weight. "And I can't stay locked inside it." His expression shifted to something close to fear. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need time to think. I'm saying I don't know who you are anymore." She moved toward the door. "I'm saying I'm terrified of bringing a child into whatever this is. She left him standing in his office, surrounded by evidence of exactly who he'd always been. The man she'd loved had been real, but he'd also been incomplete. A partial truth designed to make her stay. Walking away from him felt like tearing herself in half, but staying felt like losing herself completely. Lucia spent 3 weeks planning her disappearance while sleeping beside the man she was about to leave forever. She researched everything at the public library, using computers that couldn't be traced back to her. How to establish a new identity, which cities had strong art communities and affordable housing, how to access her grandmother's maiden name for documentation. She withdrew cash in small amounts from her teaching account, building a fund Alessandro would never notice because he'd never paid attention to money that small. The hardest part was the baby, 12 weeks along, barely showing, carrying a secret that grew heavier each day. She'd scheduled her first ultrasound for the following month, had imagined Alessandro's face when he saw their child on the screen. Now she'd go alone, if she went at all. Some nights she'd wake at 3 in the morning, watch him sleep, and nearly abandon her plans. He looked peaceful in sleep, younger, free of the weight he carried in daylight hours. She'd trace the line of his jaw with her eyes and remember afternoons in art galleries, Sunday mornings drinking coffee, moments when he'd been exactly the man she needed him to be. But then she'd remember the files, the photographs, the casual way he'd discussed ruining lives as if it were simply business. And she knew staying meant becoming complicit in everything she'd taught her students to stand against. She left on a Wednesday morning while he was meeting with suppliers. The note she left was brief, offering no forwarding address or explanation beyond the essential truth. I can't be part of this world. Don't look for me. I'm sorry. She took only what she could carry. Clothes, her grandmother's jewelry, the cash she'd saved. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, knowing Alessandro could track it. She'd already purchased a replacement with a new number he'd never have. The bus to Boston took 14 hours. She spent them watching Illinois farmland give way to Pennsylvania mountains, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or finally correcting one. Alessandro came home to emptiness that felt like violence. Her closet, half empty. Her toiletries gone from the bathroom. The studio she'd been converting into a nursery, stripped of the paint samples she'd taped to the walls. He called her phone immediately, heard it ringing from the kitchen counter, and felt something crack inside his chest. He read her note 17 times, searching for hidden messages or clues about where she'd gone. There were none. She'd left as completely as if she'd never existed. His first instinct was fury. How dare she judge him? How dare she abandon their marriage without giving him a chance to explain, to fix things, to make promises he'd actually keep this time? He crumpled the note, threw it across the room, then smoothed it out carefully and put it in his wallet where it would stay for the next 2 years. He used every resource available. His cousin, who worked in law enforcement, ran her credit cards, found nothing after the day she left. His contacts at phone companies searched for new accounts under her name, came up empty. He hired private investigators who traced her movements as far as the Chicago bus station, then lost her completely. She'd known exactly how his world worked, which meant she knew exactly how to disappear from it. 3 months of searching yielded nothing. Lucia Bellini had ceased to exist. Alessandro's grief calcified into something colder. Acceptance, maybe, or the emotional equivalent of scar tissue. He stopped searching, stopped hoping she'd call, stopped torturing himself with questions about whether she was safe, whether she regretted leaving, whether she ever thought about him in the empty hours before dawn. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity. If she'd left because of what he was, then he'd become more of it. He expanded operations into 3 new territories. He consolidated power in ways his father never had. He became exactly what she'd been afraid of, and told himself it didn't matter because she wasn't there to see it. His mother suggested Serena Fontana at a family dinner 18 months after Lucia left. Strategic alliance. She understands the life. Her father controls the eastern seaboard. Alessandro had looked at Serena across the table, beautiful in the way magazines defined beauty, sophisticated, connected, everything Lucia hadn't been, which made her safe in ways Lucia never was. I'll consider it, he'd said, and meant it. Meanwhile in Boston, Lucia Morrison lived a life measured in careful invisibility. She found work at a jewelry store through connections she'd made at a community art show. Her pregnancy advanced, and she told everyone the father was someone from her past who died in an accident. People believed her because she delivered the lie with the exhaustion of someone who genuinely grieved. The baby came early, a daughter she named after her grandmother. Raising a child alone while working full-time meant sacrifice Lucia had never imagined. But every time she looked at her daughter's face and saw Alessandro's eyes staring back at her, she knew she'd made the right choice. Their child would grow up safe from his world, even if it meant growing up without him. Neither knew the secret growing between them would force them to face everything they'd left unfinished. Neither knew that 2 years of silence was simply the intermission before the real story began. These stories take time to craft, to get the emotions right, the details perfect. If you appreciate storytelling that makes you feel something real, a like helps more than you know. The rings on the velvet tray might as well have been glass. Alessandro couldn't remember why he'd come here, what his original purpose had been. Everything before seeing Lucia felt like another man's life. When? He asked, keeping his voice low enough that the elderly couple browsing anniversary bands 3 cases away couldn't hear. Lucia arranged the rings with unnecessary precision, refusing to meet his eyes. When what? Don't play games. When are you due? That's personal information. Is it mine? The question came out harsher than he intended. Her hands stilled on the velvet. For 3 heartbeats, she didn't respond. When she finally looked up, her expression was carefully blank. I don't see how that concerns you. You know exactly how it concerns me. Alessandro leaned closer, willing her to give him something. Anything. Answer the question, Lucia. It's Lucy. And you're here to buy a ring for your fiancé, not interrogate me about my personal life. She pulled the tray back, returning it to the case with movements that suggested the conversation was over. Perhaps you prefer to work with another associate. I can get my manager. I don't want another associate. I want answers. I'm sure you do. You've always wanted things on your terms. She locked the case, the click of the mechanism sounding final. But I don't owe you explanations. Alessandro's mind raced through mathematics he'd already calculated a dozen times. 27 months since she'd left. She looked 6, maybe 7 months pregnant. The timeline aligned perfectly with their last night together. The desperate reaching for connection even as everything crumbled between them. You were pregnant when you left, he said, the realization hitting him with physical force. That's why you disappeared so completely. You didn't want me to know.
Something flickered across her face.
Pain, maybe, or confirmation she couldn't quite hide. You're making assumptions. Am I? Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me this baby has nothing to do with me, and I'll walk out of here and never bother you again. She opened her mouth, clearly intending to lie, but the words wouldn't come. They stood there, 2 feet and 2 years of silence separating them, while the truth hung between them like smoke too thick to see through. The store manager appeared from the back office, sensing tension despite their carefully controlled voices. Is everything all right here, Lucy? Fine, Lucia answered quickly. Mr. Rossi was just finishing his selection. Actually, Alessandro said, not taking his eyes off Lucia, I need more time to consider my options. The manager smiled, oblivious to the subtext. Of course, take all the time you need. Lucy is our best designer. She'll take excellent care of you. The irony of the statement would have been funny under different circumstances. When the manager retreated, Alessandro tried again. 5 minutes. Somewhere we can talk privately. No, Lucia. I said no. Her voice remained professional, but he caught the tremor underneath. You don't get to walk back into my life and make demands. You don't get to show up here shopping for another woman's ring and expect me to explain myself. I'm not demanding. I'm asking. The answer is still no. She moved to straighten already straight displays, creating distance between them. You should go. Come back when you've decided what you want. From the jewelry selection, I mean. The dismissal stung worse than anger would have. She'd perfected the art of treating him like a stranger, and he realized she'd probably been practicing this conversation in her head for 2 years. Every response calculated, every wall reinforced. I never stopped looking for you, he said quietly. Her hands paused on a display of wedding bands. You should have. Why? Because you decided unilaterally that our marriage was over? Because you disappeared without giving me a chance to fix things? There was nothing to fix. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw real emotion break through her careful control. You were always going to choose your family's business over everything else. I wasn't going to raise a child in that world. The decision was simple. So you ran. So I protected myself. And my baby. Our baby. The words hung in the air between them. Neither confirmation nor denial, just 2 words that acknowledged what they'd been dancing around since he walked in. The elderly couple approached the counter. Anniversary bands selected, oblivious to the drama playing out beside them. Lucia shifted immediately into sales mode, smiling warmly as she retrieved their choices and began processing the purchase. Alessandro stood frozen, watching her perform normalcy with the same skill she'd once used to pretend his world didn't terrify her. She measured ring sizes, explained care instructions, wrapped the purchase in elegant packaging. The perfect employee helping the perfect customers celebrate decades of marriage built on foundations that probably included honesty. When they left satisfied and happy, Lucia turned back to him with exhausted resignation. You need to leave. We're not done talking about this. Yes, we are. For today, anyway. She glanced toward the manager's office, clearly ready to call for backup if needed. You know where to find me now. That's more than you've had for 2 years. If you actually care about what's best for this baby, you'll give me space to think about whether letting you into our lives is remotely safe. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated insistently. He ignored it, but it rang again immediately. Then again, the pattern meant emergency, the kind that required his immediate attention. He pulled it out, saw his underboss's name, and felt the weight of his other life crashing back into focus. I have to take this, he said. Of course you do. The resignation in her voice cut deeper than accusation. You always have to take those calls, he answered, listening to rapid-fire information about a situation deteriorating at one of their operations. Federal agents. Search warrants. His presence required immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, ending the call. He looked at Lucia, seeing his future slipping away again. I have to go, but this conversation isn't over. It never is with you. Problems always waiting. Emergencies that matter more than anything else.
That's not fair.
No, she agreed softly. It's not. But it's true. He wanted to argue, to explain, to make her understand that this time would be different. Instead, he simply said, I'm coming back. Tomorrow. Don't bother. But they both knew he would. Alessandro returned at 5:45 the next afternoon, timing his arrival for the store's closing. Through the window, he watched Lucia count the register, her movements slow with the kind of exhaustion that came from standing all day while carrying extra weight. She pressed one hand to the small of her back, stretching, and he felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness mixed with anger at everything he'd missed. The store was empty except for her and a young assistant cleaning display cases near the front. He waited until the assistant left through the back entrance before entering. Lucia looked up at the sound of the door, resignation crossing her face when she saw him. We're closed. I know. He locked the door behind him, flipping the sign to closed. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking.
You don't get to lock me in here.
I'm locking other people out. There's a difference. He approached the counter, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening. Please, Lucia. Just talk to me. She studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward 2 chairs near the consultation area. 5 minutes. Then you leave and don't come back unless I contact you first. They sat, the afternoon light slanting through the windows and painting everything gold. Up close, he could see the toll these 2 years had taken. Shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. A thinness to her face despite the pregnancy. The kind of weariness that suggested she'd been carrying weight alone for too long. Is it mine? He asked, dispensing with preamble. Lucia's hands moved to her belly, that protective gesture he was learning to recognize. Yes, the single word hit him like a physical blow. He'd known, of course. The timeline made it obvious. But hearing her confirm it made everything real in a way calculation couldn't. When did you find out? 3 weeks after I left, I took a test at a clinic in Pennsylvania. I was on my way to Boston, had stopped for the night in some small town whose name I don't even remember. Her voice remained steady, factual. I sat in a bathroom stall and stared at those 2 lines and knew I couldn't tell you. You had no right to make that choice alone. I had every right. It was my body, my life, my child to protect. She met his eyes directly. From your world, Hal. Alessandro felt anger rising, hot and bitter. Our child. You don't get to erase me from the equation because you didn't like my job. Your job? Is that what we're calling organized crime now? Her composure cracked slightly. I didn't erase you. I protected this baby from being born into violence and corruption and constant danger. That's what parents do. Parents make decisions together. They don't run away and hide pregnancies like shameful secrets. Don't you dare judge me. Lucia leaned forward, eyes blazing. I left with $3,000 and a bus ticket. I found work while pregnant, navigated healthcare alone, delivered our daughter in a hospital where I had no family and no support system. I've raised her for 7 months by myself while you were busy doing whatever it is you do. So no, Alessandro, I don't feel guilty about protecting her from your world. The revelation that he had a daughter stopped him cold. 7 months? She was born January 15th. Pearly but healthy. Lucia's expression softened slightly when speaking about the baby. She has your eyes, your stubborn chin. When she's concentrating on something, she gets this little crease between her eyebrows that's exactly like yours. Alessandro's throat tightened. A daughter. 7 months of life he'd missed. First smiles, first sounds, all the tiny moments that would never come again. What's her name? That's not part of this conversation. The hell it's not. She's my daughter. She's my daughter. You're just the man who helped create her. Lucia stood, pacing toward the window. You want to talk about rights? Fine. You have biological connection. That's all. You don't have the right to disrupt her life or expose her to danger or claim involvement you haven't earned. I would have earned it if you'd given me the chance. Would you? She turned to face him. Would you have left the family business? Walked away from everything your father built? Moved to some anonymous city and lived an ordinary life? The question demanded honesty he wasn't sure he could give. I would have tried. Trying isn't enough when your child's safety is at stake. Either you're in or you're out. Either you choose them over everything else, or you choose your other life. There's no middle ground with children. You never gave me the choice, because you'd already made it. Her voice dropped to something quieter, sadder. That last night when I found those files, you chose protecting your family's interests over being honest with me. You minimized, you justified. You asked me to accept that destroying people's lives was just business. What kind of choice was that, Alessandro? He had no answer that wouldn't prove her point. I'm due in 8 weeks, Lucia continued. This baby, our second child, will be born into the same situation. I've spent 2 years building a safe life away from everything you represent. One conversation doesn't change that. I have a right to be involved. The words came out desperate rather than demanding. Whatever you think of me, whatever I've done, I have the right to know my children. Rights? Lucia laughed, sharp and bitter. You want to talk about rights while you're here buying an engagement ring for another woman? What about her rights? What about my right to move on? What about our daughter's right to stability instead of having her world torn apart? The engagement to Serena felt like something from another lifetime, a choice made by a different version of himself. But Lucia was right. He'd walked into her store intending to marry someone else. He had no moral high ground to stand on. I'll figure it out, he said. That's not good enough. Then tell me what is. Tell me what you need. And I'll make it happen. I need you to leave us alone. But the way she said it, eyes shining with unshed tears, voice breaking on the last word, told him she didn't entirely mean it. Or maybe she did, and that was the tragedy. That the woman he'd loved, the mother of his children, needed him gone to feel safe. Alessandro's attention snapped to the window mid-sentence. A black sedan had pulled up across the street, parking in a loading zone where no legitimate driver would stop. 2 men sat in the front seats, not moving, not talking, just watching the jewelry store with the kind of patient focus that meant they'd been trained to wait. He recognized the sedan's make. More importantly, he recognized the watching. Get away from the window, he said, his voice shifting to the command tone Lucia hadn't heard in 2 years. What? Now, move to the back of the store. Lucia followed his gaze, seeing the car but not understanding its significance. You're being paranoid. I'm being careful. There's a difference. Alessandro stood, positioning himself between her and the window while keeping the sedan in his peripheral vision. How many exits does this store have? Front door and back entrance through the storage room. Why? Because we need to leave. Right now. I'm not going anywhere with you just because you're acting strange. But uncertainty crept into her voice. She'd learned during their marriage to trust his instincts about danger, even when she couldn't see the threat herself. Alessandro pulled out his phone, typed a quick message, then pocketed it. That car across the street belongs to the Castellano family out of Philadelphia. They're competitors. Hostile ones. Lucia's face paled. You think they're here for you? I think they're here because someone told them about you. About us. He moved closer, keeping his voice low and urgent. I came here yesterday. I came back today. My car's been parked outside for 20 minutes. They've been watching, and now they know you matter to me. You don't know that for certain. I've been doing this long enough to know exactly what surveillance looks like. He glanced at her belly, then back to the sedan. They know you're pregnant. They've probably been photographing us through that window for the past 10 minutes, which means whoever sent them knows you exist. The reality of what he was saying crashed over Lucia in visible waves. This is exactly why I left.
I know. And you were right.
But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is getting you somewhere safe before they decide watching isn't enough. You're overreacting, am I? You want to bet your life on that? Our daughter's life? He moved toward the back of the store, checking sightlines. I've already texted my security team. They'll be here in 5 minutes. We can wait here, or we can leave through the back. Your choice, but make it fast. Lucia stood frozen, caught between the life she'd built and the danger she'd spent 2 years avoiding. If I leave with you, if I accept your protection, I'm admitting I need you. That I can't keep us safe alone. You did keep yourself safe. For 2 years you did everything right. But I found you, which means others can too. His expression softened slightly. This isn't weakness, Lucia. This is survival. I don't want your world touching my daughter, our daughter. And it already has. The moment I walked into this store, he moved back to her, hands raised in supplication. I'm not asking you to come back to me. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I'm asking you to let me keep you alive long enough to figure out what comes next. She pressed both hands to her belly as if shielding the baby from decisions neither of them wanted to make. Temporary, just until I deliver. Then we're gone again. Agreed. No lies. No minimizing. If there's danger, you tell me everything. Done. And no wedding to Serena. If you want any part of these children's lives, you end that engagement today. Alessandro nodded without hesitation. Consider it ended. I mean it, Alessandro. I won't share custody with a man married to someone else. I won't have my children confused about who their father belongs to. You have my word. Serena was always a strategic choice, not a real one. You showing up yesterday made that clear. He checked the window again. The sedan hadn't moved. We need to go. Now. Lucia grabbed her purse from behind the counter, hands shaking as she locked the register. My apartment. I need to get clothes for me and the baby. We'll send someone. It's not safe for you to go back there. She's 7 months old, Alessandro. She needs her things. Her routine. You can't just uproot her because you're paranoid. I can when uproot means alive. He guided her toward the back entrance, one hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching. My team will get everything you need. Right now we move. They reached the back door as his phone buzzed. The message was brief. 2 more cars approaching from west. Hostile confirmed. Alessandro's jaw tightened. They were out of time. He pushed open the back door, scanning the alley before pulling Lucia through. His Mercedes waited at the end of the alley, engine already running, driver ready. Behind them, tires squealed as another vehicle turned into the alley from the opposite end. Run, Alessandro said, no longer requesting. Now. The safe house sat 40 minutes outside Boston, a colonial-style home surrounded by trees that provided cover without feeling claustrophobic. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, painting the hardwood floors gold. Security personnel moved through the property with quiet efficiency, checking perimeters Alessandro had established within an hour of arrival. Lucia sat in the living room, her 7-month-old daughter sleeping against her shoulder. The baby had cried during the rushed departure, confused by strange men and her mother's tension. Now she slept peacefully, thumb in mouth, completely unaware that her world had shifted on its axis. Alessandro watched them from the doorway, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what her father says, Serena. The engagement is over. Effective immediately. Lucia could hear the woman's raised voice through the speaker, sharp with anger and disbelief. No, there's no negotiation. Send the ring back. Keep it. I don't care. Alessandro's tone remained flat, businesslike. Tell your father the Philadelphia alliance is off the table. He can accept it or not. That's his choice. He ended the call, silencing Serena's protests mid-sentence. That's going to cause problems for you, Lucia said quietly. Probably her father controls significant territory. He'll see this as an insult. Alessandro pocketed his phone, crossing to sit in the chair opposite her. But I meant what I said. If I want any part of my children's lives, I do this right. Children, Lucia repeated, plural. That still sounds strange. 2 daughters, both with your determination and my stubbornness. God help us. He smiled, and for a moment she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. Not the crime boss or the strategist, just Alessandro. What's her name? You never told me. Lucia hesitated, then relented. Rosa, after your grandmother. Something cracked in his expression. You named her after Nonna? She was the only person in your family who ever really accepted me. It felt right. She adjusted the sleeping baby against her shoulder. She has no idea who her father is. I told her you lived far away, that sometimes grown-ups make complicated choices. What are you going to tell her now? I don't know yet. The truth, eventually, that you're trying to be better than you were. Lucia met his eyes. Are you trying to be better? I'm going to. Alessandro leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been transitioning the legitimate businesses for the past year. Real estate development, import operations that actually import legal goods. It's slower than I wanted, but it's happening. How long before you're completely out? Honestly? 2 years minimum, maybe 3. The connections run deep. and cutting them all at once would trigger wars I can't afford right now. But I'm working toward it. You said that before. I know. And I failed. He held her gaze steadily. I'm not promising perfection, Lucia. I'm promising effort. Real, sustained effort. Because the alternative is losing you and both our daughters, and I can't accept that. Lucia wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that this time would be different. But trust required proof, not just promises. You have 8 weeks. Until this baby is born. Show me you're serious about change, and we'll talk about what comes next. 8 weeks, he repeated.
And
then we figure out custody arrangements, co-parenting, how to raise 2 daughters who deserve better than what we gave them so far. I'm not moving back to Chicago. Boston is our home now. I understand. I can relocate some operations here. Be present. Alessandro stood, moving to the window to check the security perimeter. I know this doesn't fix everything. I know showing up and making promises isn't enough. But I'm asking for the chance to prove I can be the father they deserve. Not the father you deserve to have? The question slipped out before Lucia could stop it. He turned back to her, surprised. You remember that conversation? I remember all of them. The good ones and the terrible ones. She shifted Rosa to her other shoulder. You told me once your father taught you that power mattered more than people. That survival required ruthlessness. I was 28 and trying to sound impressive. You were honest. Maybe the most honest you'd ever been with me. Lucia stood carefully, not wanting to wake the baby. I never stopped loving you, Alessandro. That's what made leaving so hard. But love isn't enough if it means compromising everything I believe in.
I know. Do you?
Because I need you to understand that these 8 weeks aren't about winning me back. They're about proving you can be safe for our daughters. That's all that matters now. Alessandro crossed the room, stopping just close enough that she could feel his warmth without touching. Can I meet her? Really meet her, not just watch her sleep. Lucia considered, then nodded. She shifted the baby, and Alessandro carefully took his daughter into his arms for the first time. Rosa stirred, opened her eyes briefly to study this stranger's face, then settled back against his chest with complete trust. She looks like you, he whispered. She has your stubborn streak. She has your stubborn streak. You'll see. Lucia placed her hand over his, both of them holding their daughter together. The baby in Lucia's belly kicked hard as if demanding acknowledgement. This one's more active, keeps me up at odd hours. Another girl? I don't know yet. Does it matter? Not even a little. They stood like that, afternoon light surrounding them, 2 broken people holding the pieces of a future they'd have to build carefully from fragments of trust and hope. Not a reunion, but a possibility. Not forgiveness, but a willingness to try. Sometimes love means choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. Sometimes it means risking your heart one more time for people who deserve better than your fear. That's how a woman who ran from love found it waiting when she needed it most. I would really appreciate it if you could share your thoughts about my videos in the comments. Your feedback helps me improve and create even better content for you. Thank you for being here.